We will begin our talks of protesting in the US with the Civil Rights Movement. The NAACP was created in 1909 by prominent black and white protesters in order to fight for racial integration in the US. This organization became instrumental in the Brown v. Board of Education case of 1951, which struck down on segregation in schools. After this case, not only did the United States see its first integrated school, but civil rights activists began to peacefully protest all around the United States. Although all seemed well, turmoil still existed in the U.S. over civil rights cases such as the Little Rock Nine. Students were attempting to attend their integrated school but were stopped not only by their peers but by the governor and the National Guard as well. Although Martin Luther King Jr. emphasized means of protesting with nonviolence, the rise of the extremist Black Panthers as well as Malcolm X and the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. surged an era of violence. However, not all was lost. In 1964, the Civil Rights Bill was approved by President Johnson to end racial discrimination. This was heavily influenced by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s and the March on Washington in 1963. As stated by Martin Luther King Jr. in his letter from Birmingham jail, the purpose of direct action is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. This was definitely seen in the March on Washington, where over 250,000 people attended. Martin Luther King Jr. inspired other civil rights leaders such as Cesar Chavez. As stated in Chavez's Lessons of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., "My friends, as we enter a new decade, it should be clear to all of us that there is an unfinished agenda, that we have miles to go before we reach the promised land." This just states that the civil rights movement was not just all about one race, but of all people of color. Next, we will be discussing the feminist movement. While the civil rights movement was intended to be for colored people as a whole, many of the women within the movement felt as though they were left out. Much of the civil rights movement was directed towards the advancement of colored men and really did leave a lot of the colored women out. As stated by the Black Women's Manifesto, the Black woman is demanding a new set of female definitions and a recognition of herself as a citizen, companion, and confidant, not a matriarchal villain or a step-stool baby maker. Much of the feminist movement paralleled the civil rights movement in the sense that organizations such as the National Organization for Women, as well as having radical members within their movement. A big part of the feminist movement was the right to choose and be able to control their bodies, whether it be through birth control or abortion. As stated by the article written by Maxine Williams, Black Women and the Struggle for Liberation, enforced motherhood is a form of male supremacy. It is reactionary and brutal. No matter how free you allow women to be, if they don't have the right to choose their own life, they are still enslaved. While many women did like the choice of being able to take birth control and having safe abortions, it definitely wasn't a unanimous decision. Conservative activists such as Phyllis Schlafly fought against birth control and an open view of sexuality, as well as the Equal Rights Amendment. She strongly believed that a woman's place was in the home and subordinate to her husband, even though she was a professional woman herself. While the era was close to ratification against conservative activists like Schlafly, the feminist movement had no choice. Women weren't all talk, however. On November 1st, the organization Women Strike for Peace joined 50,000 women together in order to strike for peace and call an end to the nuclear arms race. Lastly, we will be talking about the anti-war movement. Even though a large amount of protesting was seen during the civil rights movement as well as the feminist movement, this was a trend carried on to the anti-war movement. This movement was something everyone could relate to regardless of your age, sex, or ethnicity. A majority of the United States was unhappy with the war, whether it was because they saw it as a waste of resources or a pointless fight. Protests began around 1965 when the draft was increased up to $33,000 a month. Many of the poor, young, working-class men were left without any choice and were forced to enlist. One of the first signs of protest to the Vietnam War was tearing up or burning your draft paper. With a large amount of young American men coming back in body bags, to many America was sacrificing her male youth. Many professors on college campuses were holding teach-ins on the war in Vietnam in order to educate students. Essentially, to many protesters, the goal was to make the war visible to mainstream America so they saw what was really happening and not just what the government wanted them to see. As stated by John Lennon in his song Imagine, "Imagine there's no countries, it isn't that hard to do, nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace." Ultimately, this was known all across the nation and a majority did want to in fact live in peace. When asked what I think makes a good protest movement, the first thing that came to my mind was a good cause. You have to have a good cause and a reasonable cause. You can't just protest out of the willy-nilly. You also have to have a large following. And in order to have a large following, you have to be protesting something that you're passionate about and something that you're knowledgeable about. That way you can explain it to people well and they'll know what you're talking about. And then they can tell other people and they can represent you correctly, because the way people represent you is the way everyone's going to take your call.